Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Talk About the POTS Life, your go-to podcast for all things POTS. Whether you're living with POTS or supporting someone who is, this is the place for you.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Let's Talk About the POTS Life.
This week we have another POTS graduate joining us. Her name is Stephanie. She's a working mom of two, and she is going to share her story with us today.
Good morning.
Welcome, Stephanie. We're so glad to have you today to share your story with us about your journey with POTS and really your experience with the POTS Life program.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
Do you want to start off with just sharing a little bit about yourself and your story? You could start with life before POTS or,
Sure.
Getting the diagnosis, wherever you'd like to start.
Yeah. So I'm 33 years old. Like Kelsey said, I'm a mom of two. I work as a speech language pathologist. I am in healthcare, but I'm also a part-time stay-at-home mom. I was diagnosed with POTS in July of 2022. So I was 31 years old. My symptoms came on pretty suddenly. Life before my symptoms was just active, normal. I was able to do everything with my kids. I was able to exercise, run, walk. I do bar classes a couple days a week. And then one day I just woke up with symptoms. It started off as just a headache. It turned into what I call an occipital headache, so like the back of my head, and then I had really bad coat hanger pain. That turned into severe dizziness, adrenaline rushes, and pre-syncope. And this all happened within like 2 weeks. It hit me really hard. Wasn't able to work at the time. I was calling off. I wasn't able to take care of my kids some days. My husband had to come home from work some days to help me out so I could rest. And I think in the span of a month, I was in the hospital 3 times trying to figure out what was going on with me because I knew something wasn't right. The second time I went, my symptoms were so bad. I actually had such bad neurological symptoms with the dizziness, the headaches, the pre-syncope, and then my limbs became numb. So they actually flagged me as a possible stroke.
This was, and you'll find with Steph's story, but she is one I would say that had, correct me if I'm wrong, but that numbness was a big thing because it was all left-sided.
It was all left-sided.
Right?
So it was my left arm, my left foot. It was never on my right side. So that was really scary. So I knew something was wrong.
And being in healthcare,
right,
you can't help it but panic or
absolutely.
Be like, uh-oh, I know what to look
yes,
for.
Absolutely. So it was relieving that, I went to the hospital that day and I had all the testing done. But at the same time, every test came back normal. My CT, my MRI, all my blood work, everything they did. And I was relieved, but also completely shocked because in the moment I felt like my body was just shutting down. And from there, it just got worse and worse. My diagnosis journey took about 14 weeks. So I know for some people with POTS, it takes years, but I was pretty on top of it with seeing all these specialists and ruling out, is it the crystals in my ear that's causing the dizziness? Is it just vertigo? Is it low blood pressure? It was, I saw, I think 7 or 8 specialists that all said everything was normal. It wasn't until I went to my PCP one day, and when you walk into the doctor's office, they take your vitals right away, and my resting heart rate was 115.
She's like, this isn't normal.
She was like, you're usually in the 70s, but she said, you look like you just came from work. Maybe you're stressed. And I was like, I'm fine. Something's off. So once I realized that my heart rate was a little bit higher, I started wearing my Fitbit to track my heart rate every day. And that's when I realized I was jumping up to 110s, 120s, up to 140s was my max. But that was with simple tasks like brushing my teeth in the morning or walking to my car.
Was that your thought process from your experience in healthcare to start tracking your,
Ye-
or was that your PCP recommendation?
Kind of both. I also just like
Okay.
knew in my gut that that wasn't right, and with all my symptoms, I was like, this has to be related somehow. On top of the symptoms that I told you guys, I was also having what I call air hunger. Like I couldn't take a full breath. I was very short of breath, and I couldn't do simple tasks like even just like cleaning, like vacuuming or anything. Walking up the steps, I just felt like I needed a break. So I knew it was somehow related. But wearing it helped me because that way I could report to my doctor, like, hey, this is what I'm seeing. So with that, they recommended that I go see cardiology. I had an echocardiogram done, normal. Stress test, a treadmill stress test was normal. And then they did the Holter monitor for about a week, which measures your heart rate just throughout the day. And nothing really significant came up on there other than periods of tachycardia. So with that, they said you may want to get tested for POTS. Sent me to Allegheny General. I got a tilt table test and finally got my answers.
I think you see that a lot with POTS, or, as you talk to everybody, and Steph's story is no different, that, it's like a blessing and a curse. It's good that all that testing was normal, but then, you still feel horrible. So you're like, but wait, something's wrong.
Right.
And then becoming your own advocate is so important, because if she didn't keep going, this is how people struggle for years. Or you just say, okay, it must be that, or everything's fine. And then not only that, but getting to the cardiologist and the echo's clear, which is great because POTS is not a defect of the
Right.
heart. So yes, you expect the echo to be clear. You expect the Holter to show exactly what she said. And even the stress test, same thing, because that's why it's so hard to capture unless your cardiologist is aware or somebody's aware of like, hey, this doesn't add up, or all these things are clear to then send you for the tilt.
Right.
And that's what's frustrating, because, you don't feel good and then this happens. Can you share a little bit? Okay, so we got the tilt table, formal diagnosis of POTS, and then how did you find us and what did that next step look like?
So after I got my diagnosis, it was in October of 2022. I didn't start working with you until January of 2024. So I had a little over a year where I just tried to manage it and figure it out, but it was very hard. So after I got my diagnosis, they started me on a beta blocker just to help with my tachycardia. I felt like I was getting back to normal, but still wasn't myself. Like I still just didn't feel good, but I wasn't as bad as I was in the beginning. But about a year ago in December of 2024, I had a couple viruses, just like common cold. I think I had a stomach virus, and it knocked me out completely. I was in bed for days at a time. Again, my husband had to help to just take care of the kids while I just slept. So I couldn't live like that. I'm a mom. I have to take care of myself.
There's no off days.
No, there's no off days. My kids are very young. They're 5 and 3. They don't stop. So that's when I was like, you know what? I've heard of you, Kelsey. I actually came across one of the news articles. I think it was your very first one. But at that time, to be honest, I read it and I thought it was for people that were more severe POTS, like bedbound. So I didn't really look into it too much. But then once I had my flare up and I was in bed, just like unable to function, I was like, I gotta do something. So that's when I reached out to you and we scheduled the evaluation.
So I think another great point that Steph has, it's so common when I talk to others with POTS is, we all compare ourselves. Well, I'm not bad enough. I'm not in bed, right? And then the meds, and this is where I say, like, the meds are so helpful and a very helpful piece for so many, myself included, right? It allowed me to go and continue to do other things that I wanted to do. But it's just enough. It's like I've been saying lately, there's so many holes in the bucket, and it's plugging a few of them, but it can't withstand big illnesses. It can't, because POTS is still there. You're managing, band-aiding, whatever word you want to use, but it's like not enough to withstand an illness. Or Rachel, the other graduate we talked about, she had a medical emergency and she was band-aiding enough, but then that happened and it was like, okay, here I am in bed. I'm not worse than I was, but like I'm back at the beginning. So it's not uncommon to hear like, okay, I was doing good, or people say I'll have so many good days and then I have something happen and then the floor has been pulled out. So common. And then I know when Steph came, she was, you weren't going to come, right?
I wasn't.
Like you filled out the paperwork and then you're like, wait, maybe I don't need it. And she had to travel. And it's, I don't know. I think it's nerve-wracking. Like, do I need this? Should I go that far? Is it real? Is it going to work? All these things. And then the day she came, she was going to cancel.
I was. And you know what? It was because I was so symptomatic that day. I will never forget. I could not get out of bed. I was so dizzy. I was so nauseous. And I think my evaluation was at 8 a.m. and I had to travel like 45 minutes. I was like, I just don't think I can do it. I went to message you on Facebook Messenger because when I called your office, like you weren't there.
Right.
The message wouldn't go through. And I think that was a God thing because it was like, get your butt up and go. I cried the whole way to your evaluation, to your office. I remember my heart rate was 120 the whole time. I didn't feel well at all, but I made it.
And she made it.
We're
and
so
I
glad.
say, yeah, right. I say all the time, if I could take a picture of everybody that first day, we were in my old office. I remember you had your glasses on, like you just look so down and out, like so many of us do.
Right. That's how it was.
And I remember you're like, I don't even know if these numbers are true. This paperwork I had her fill out. I don't even know if these numbers are accurate because what I feel like now compared to when I filled that out a month ago was just so different.
Absolutely, it was.
And the story you were sharing about your symptoms and, you saw these different providers along the way, and then you kept advocating for yourself. That's something with like any chronic illness. If you don't like continue to advocate, we've said this several times on here, for yourself and say, I'm not accepting how I'm feeling as my new normal. I don't want to be able to not get out of bed. I don't want to be able to play with my kids,
Right.
So that continue advocating for yourself really is what I just can't express enough how important that is in your POTS journey, in anyone's POTS journey. Yeah.
And I say this all the time to anyone who's experiencing any sort of symptoms, whether it's POTS or not, maybe another chronic illness, like you know your body best when something is wrong. And so many times in that diagnosis journey, I don't want to say I was like medically gaslit, but
Probably.
A little bit.
I hate to use that term.
I mean, probably. I know.
But, people did, providers did suggest, would you like to try anxiety medicine? Are you having panic attacks? I would get that feeling of like impending doom. I don't know if you ever experienced that, Kelsey, but like a flip of a switch, like my body would just go into fight or flight.
That's how I started. And still, that's why I watch Hallmark in the evening, because I would get that in the evening. And if I watch something like suspenseful, I'm like, something's right.
Yeah. It's something I have never experienced until I had POTS. I've heard other people talk about it, but I've never experienced it. But I will always say, when you know your body best, you have to advocate for yourself and keep pushing, because it's not just anxiety. If this is happening, there's so much more. And
especially a young mom of two, a young working mom of two, that is like the number one thing. Well, you're anxious, or you have two kids. Or maybe you can touch on when you were having these feelings when you would take your kids out. Yeah. And they were like, oh, well, you must be panicking when you have your kids. But it would only be in certain places with bright lights or things like that.
Yeah. So these adrenaline rushes that I would get, that feeling of just constant fight or flight that would just turn on really quickly, was always at the grocery store, or if I would take my kids out somewhere, if we were somewhere where there was fluorescent light, I would feel like the walls were closing in. I would get really hot and sweaty, and I would feel like I was going to faint. And it just hit me really quickly. It never happened at home. So that's another reason people were suggesting, home is your safe space. So you're there, your husband's home. But when you're out, maybe you are having panic attacks. And I started to actually believe, like, maybe I was.
100%. Right.
But that wasn't it.
No. And I use that example all the time for patients here in office and who I talk to on the app. That is what happens. You start to believe these things, or, Steph is a great example that the lights or that sensory input, you have your kids, you have the bright lights, you have everything going on, you know, the climate in the stores, things like that. And it's a perfect storm for like it's a bad recipe for everything to implode. And that's what I want to scream sometimes. Like, okay, so if she takes her kids to the park, it's fine. She doesn't feel that because it's natural light and whatever. But if she goes in the store, it doesn't add up.
Yeah, that's what was happening. It was very bizarre.
So we got you to the office after some hurdles. We were so glad that you were there. What were your initial thoughts when Kelsey was like, here's how we're going to get you better. It's moving your body, which maybe isn't what you originally thought. Yeah.
So my original thought was, first of all, I was a little, I don't want to say apprehensive, but I was very active before starting Kelsey's program.
She loves bar.
She sure does.
And that was her number one goal. She was like, Kelsey, when can I do bar? I was like, we'll get you there, but not today.
So I've been doing bar for like 3.5 years. And when I'm in a POTS flare up, I can't do it. I have that exercise intolerance. I have to take like months off at a time. So when I started with Kelsey, I was pretty much down and out. So that was my goal. I said, I have to get back to bar. I also was not able to attend church, which was huge for me. Being in the sanctuary with like the music and the lights would just cause that feeling that we just discussed. So I was like, I got to get back to my normal life. But starting with Kelsey, again, I was very active. So the first day, I think I was on the bike for like 8 minutes. Is that it?
If that, yeah.
I was like, this is it? Like, is this really where we're starting? Because at the time, even though I wasn't feeling well, like, it was pretty easy for me. Like, I didn't really struggle with that exercise, that early on in the program. Until about month 4 or 5, I was like, all right, this is getting a little harder. Like, I can feel it now.
Especially coming from where she was. So she came from like a very active lifestyle. This hit, and yes, it was a little interim till she got here. She was still trying. And she was at bar and had just recently thought about pausing it. So this is normal where I have to say to people, okay, trust me, a lot of POTS that finds the POTS life or our office, we're type A. So, and we've talked about this before in the past. So it's a mind thing too, to be like, trust me, we're going to go back to go forward.
Right. And that's how it was. It took me a couple months, but I believe in April, I was able to get back to bar. And I was able to get back there rather quickly.
That's great.
In April, I also, in addition to your program, did some significant diet changes. And that also helped as well. And then I think it was in mid-April, I was back at bar and I didn't have any exercise intolerance, no pre-syncope feelings. My heart rate was pretty normal. And I've, knock on wood, been there ever since.
And she got to go back to church. And listen, when we say these things, myself, her, others in the program, it is not, right? It's not smooth sailing.
It's not.
There were bumps. And she would come in sometimes and be like, oh my gosh, you'd get good. And then you would have her kids got sick and her son ended up in the hospital. So you see these little flares along the way, which you expect, right? The more adrenaline that comes, POTS is still there. I mean, it's still here to stay, right? Yeah.
It's still there, but you kind of learn to manage it better. You know what your triggers are the longer that you have it. So in July, in 1 week, I had a common cold. My son was in the hospital. And since he was in the hospital, I didn't sleep for almost 2 days. And I was knocked out for like 3 weeks. But then I got back to my normal. And then the next time I had a cold, I was kind of in a flare for like 5 days. And then I was back to my normal. So the flares are getting shorter. They're not affecting me as much.
And they're not putting you in bed. Like you don't feel great in your day-to-day. And that's what the goal of all of this is, right? Like the hole you have to climb out of in a flare is way, not nearly as deep as it was when you started day one.
Correct. I would say I maybe have 1 to 2 what I say bad days a month, and they're not even bad. It's more like I'm just more symptomatic that day, and I know that I need to rest. But before it was constant.
And that's really great that you, like you said, you're learning the signs, the symptoms. You know what your body needs, so you're not you're skipping bar class that day because you're just not feeling
Right.
great. Like adapting to still doing the things you enjoy and spending time on the activities you enjoy with your family, but knowing where your limits are is really impactful along the POTS journey.
Yes.
And for life, right? If
Yeah.
at this point, it's something you're always going to have to manage. I'm 4 years out almost, and I'm still, you have those days where things aren't as great or whatever, an illness or something. But yeah, you just continue to manage. You're so in tune with your body. I think something else to note for you, Steph, is that watch would make you a nervous wreck, right? When you were first diagnosed. And now, last I saw her, she didn't even wear it.
I
like,
don't
"Oh,
wear
I don't
it.
have
It
on."
is off.
See?
I haven't worn it in about 5 months. It would just give me anxiety because I would be looking at it all day. Is my heart rate good right now? Or I'm a little short of breath. What's my heart rate? And I was constantly checking it. I'm like, why do I need this? I have POTS. I know I have POTS.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I took it off and I've been fine. You don't need to fixate on it.
Because it just, you can't help but panic when you see it. Or, I just told somebody on the app the other day, she said, I think it was when she got up at night, but she was like, when I get up at night and then it's skyrocketing or through the day, and I said, I'm going to be honest, just stop looking at it.
Yeah.
Go more symptom-based and judge off of that. And then if it's really bad or something, you can't, you use all your tricks or all the tools in the toolbox and you can't get it. Okay, then we look at it and see, are we dealing with something else? But
Right.
yeah, the less we fixate on it, the better, because it just drives
It does make
more
you
adrenaline.
It does make you more anxious. And one thing that I've always said is if I wear it every day, it's just a reminder like, hey, you have POTS and you still have POTS and it's still here.
Mhm.
And I don't want that. Like even on my good days, I don't want to be reminded of it. So there's no use for me wearing it. I was also never one of those POTS people that was in the 180s. Like the highest I ever got was like the 140s, even though that's not normal, but it was never really scary.
I just had this flashback to, I was just talking about this the other day because I have an Apple Watch, and when I first got it years ago, I needed my circles closed before I went to bed. And it's like the same concept of if it's on my wrist, I'm going to want to see this thing, even if it's not, doesn't really matter. So it really does. These little technology things, while they're so helpful, they really can become a problem of them.
You can.
Right.
Yeah.
They absolutely can.
Well, and especially with Steph taking a beta blocker, right? I would always say don't fixate on it because it is a little different. And the beta blocker is helping to lower it and, just put it away. Don't look.
Yeah.
It's better because I was the same way. Kale told me we were just talking about it again the other day. He's like, oh, remember when you fixated on your blood pressure? That's all I heard was that little machine. So we're all guilty of it.
I did the blood pressure too. We still have our blood pressure cuff and I check it every now and then, but it's always the same. Like there's never anything significant. So I'm like, why do I do this to myself?
We can't help it.
So as a POTS Life graduate, looking back, what would you tell someone that's early on in their diagnosis and looking for help?
So as I mentioned, I would say, again, your body best. Keep seeking help. Try to find someone who can help you figure this out. Keep the faith. The biggest thing for me was just, my prayer life, getting to church, digging into my faith. And that really led the path. But also I feel like it did lead me to Kelsey, and she was brought into my journey for a reason. But for those that are struggling with this, just try to keep having hope because the bad days are going to be there, but I think there's more good days on the horizon, and the good days are so worth it. When you experience these good days, it's like, wow, I didn't know that I could get here, but you can.
I love that because it's so true. When you have those bad days, even no matter where you are in the journey, they can feel so bad and so demoralizing. Yeah, isolating, demoralizing. Like you just feel so alone. But I love that you said like they are on the horizon and they can be there.
Right.
You just got to find that right path to get you there.
Absolutely.
And the support system around you. We talked on here about Kelsey and her family being very supportive. And you talked about your husband and your kids and your faith. And it's great to build that community around you for those bad days.
Right. Absolutely. And I think being in the program with Kelsey, it was nice to meet other females that also have POTS because it is very isolating. I didn't know anyone before I started your program that had POTS. So coming to your clinic and being on the bike with someone else that's experiencing the same things as me, the same symptoms, because there's times where I'm like, the numbness I was talking about, I was always like, is there something else going on? But then I'm like biking with 2 other girls that are like, oh yeah, I have that too. And I'm like, oh, good. It's not just me.
Phew.
Everything's good. It's just POTS.
You just, it gives you a sense of peace, or you can relate to others. And that's what I hope through all of this, through in clinic, through on the app. Inside the app, we have this forum, which is like a Facebook group essentially, but it's just for other users on the app. And it mimics what we can do in office, but translates it, virtually. And they're relating on there the same thing. Like, hey, I'm getting married soon. How did you feel at this month? And somebody on month 6 can be like, I'm here. And then month 3 is like, hey, keep going. It gets better.
Right.
Or I feel this symptom. And I think, Steph, especially for the numbness, I know that, obviously that's a scary symptom. A young woman with numbness. I think that was a big piece that, like you said, you biked with 2 others and they're like, oh no, I feel that. And it helped you. Hearing other people say it just helps, at least for me, like bring down the level of concern. Like, okay, this is maybe normal.
Right. And it did. And that's the thing with POTS is like the symptoms, the spectrum is so wide.
Yeah.
GI issues, the numbness, like things that I'm still experiencing new symptoms here and there where I'm like, is this POTS or is this like, what's going on? But the symptoms, the spectrum of symptoms is so wide. So you just never know. But yes, having your clinic, it was a big support for sure. Just meeting other women that also are experiencing everything that I've gone through. I needed that. I did.
Yeah, I think mental health is such a huge component of this too, because like we talked about, it can take you to dark places. So having others to relate to, or just share in the bad days, share in the good days, just like other like-minded individuals that can relate, good or bad, is so helpful.
Right. I agree.
If you could describe your life with POTS now with just one word, what would that be and why?
Life is wonderful now. 1 year ago, I was really struggling, but now I'm able to function. I can work. I can take care of my kids. I can play with my kids. My son actually said something to me maybe 2 months ago, 3 months ago. He said, Mom, you're never sick anymore.
Oh, my heart.
And at first I didn't really know what he was talking about, but I was like, oh my gosh, like the beginning of 2024, I was in bed almost
all the time.
All the time. If I wasn't on the bed, I was on the couch. So, and that was what we said. Oh, Mommy's sick. Mommy's not feeling good. So it's been a journey, but life is wonderful now. And again, I feel like I finally have control of this.
So amazing. And it's so true. Kids are so perceptive. They pick up on things. And although we're trying our best, they're so, I don't even know, innocent. They just see it for what it is. So the fact that he can say that, but now notice such a difference is just such a testament to you too. She put in the work, and yes, there were plenty of bumps along the road, but she kept coming. And exactly what she said earlier, like those good days are on the horizon. She's there. It's still going to be bumpy. It's a lifelong thing that she now has her maintenance program and a friend in us for life. So for support. But honestly, she did such great work and she was committed, and we're so proud of her because she's just at a whole different point when compared to 1 year ago when she walked into my office not wanting to come.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. We really appreciate your support and your willingness to share your journey
Thank you.
with everyone.
And to be able to help others and relate, it's just the amount of people that this will touch is so great.
Oh, good. Well, thank you so much for having me.
So if you want to learn more about our program, you can head to thepotslife.com. You can check us out on social media and We are so thankful to have you guys listen today, and we can't wait to see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.